Hello, this is Jules of the Moment, sort of. This is a slightly more advanced video, so I've included links to the Start Here and glossary playlists in the description box below for your reference. This video is an attempt to address one particularly confusing aspect of trying to assess a person's stage of consciousness, your own or someone else's. The situation when the individual person's stage is different from the stage of their culture. We all start at beige and grow up through however many subsequent stages. And historically, most of us get to the stage of our surrounding culture around adulthood and stay there for the rest of our lives. But we do move through the earlier stages in childhood. Some people stay in earlier stages throughout their adult lives, and some people move past their surrounding culture's stage. These individual versus culture mismatches seem to be becoming more and more common lately, so I felt it was time to do a video on distinguishing between the two. An individual culture mismatch can cause normal questions for diagnosing someone's stage to give misleading results. The person's answers will tend to sound like whatever stage their culture is from, because that's the lens they automatically use and the language they know. The example diagnostic question in the original Spiral Dynamics book by Don Beck and Christopher Cohen was, what is life all about? There are some examples of Italian Renaissance thinkers I can think of who I strongly suspect were in yellow stage, but their surrounding culture was blue to blue-orange stage Christianity. So I could easily imagine some of them immediately answering that life is about understanding God and becoming ideal Christians. On the surface of it, this wouldn't initially sound like a yellow stage answer. Even my own Locating Yourself on the Spiral video, which I will link below, was chock full of questions that could easily be influenced by one's culture. I think the notable exceptions might be 1. Questions having to do with problems that you're facing, like, what are the problems I seem to be facing in life right now, and what is similar about them? What seem to be the obstacles to what I want most in life right now? What seem to be the obvious solutions to those obstacles? The reason why I think problems questions make such good diagnostic questions for consciousness development stages is that problems are how we learn. Each stage solves the problems of the stage that came before and provides a new set of problems that are the new core work to do. 2. Questions having to do with what you're internally experiencing, like, if I could feel one way all the time, but I could only choose one, which way would I choose to feel? And 3. How and why questions. For example, the answer to the question, if I had all the money, time, energy, resources, etc., I could possibly want, what would I do? Could easily be powerfully influenced by one's culture. But the follow-up question, and why, helps you to take a close look at your internal motivations, which are much more likely to be accurate measures of your individual stage. To get around the problem of cultural influence, when you're trying to diagnose yourself, do your best to answer honestly based on what feels natural to you right now, how you are actually thinking and feeling right now, and the actions you are actually taking right now, how you're going about them, and why. What are the problems you're facing? Why do you care about them? And how are you going about solving them? Try to consider what cultural influences you might have, for example, from your family, friends, school/work/religion, and your wider culture, what stages of consciousness they might represent, and how they might affect your natural answers. These often show up as should-type feelings. If you can, try to separate out these external influences and instead answer your diagnostic questions as authentically as possible, regardless of any shoulds. When you're trying to diagnose someone else, the matter becomes much more complex. Diagnosing other people's stages of consciousness can be a great exercise for understanding spiral dynamics better and for better understanding individual people, cultures, politics, history, and so many other fascinating subjects. You can try your hand at diagnosing people you personally know, friends, family members, coworkers, etc., famous people, people you admire, and why you might admire them, people who rub you the wrong way and why that might be the case, historical figures, even fictional characters, although this can sometimes be more illuminating of the creator's lack of understanding of how development works. But diagnosing someone other than yourself comes with its own set of challenges. 1. You can never truly know what someone else's experience is like from the inside of their head. 2. People can lie to themselves and others for all kinds of reasons. 3. If you're diagnosing someone you can't actually talk to, like a historical figure, a celebrity, a fictional character, or just someone who doesn't have the patience for this kind of thing, you might need to work from significantly less data. 4. You have a culture and an individual stage too. So not only do you have to separate the individual in question from their culture, but you also need to keep an eye on your own biases from your stage and from your culture. So when you're trying to diagnose someone else, 1. First, keep a beady eye on your own lenses from your stage and from your culture as you're trying to diagnose someone else and their culture. Constantly check your assumptions as best as you can. 2. Take a crack at diagnosing the stage or stages of the other person's strongest cultural influences. For example, the culture they grew up in, the wider culture they are in at the time that you're trying to diagnose them, and the culture or cultures of people they seem to spend the most time with at that time. Then pay attention to how these cultures might be influencing them. 3. Get as much of their own perspective as you can. If you are able to actually talk to the person and ask them questions, ask follow-up how and why questions whenever it seems like they might help you separate out their individual stage from the external influences of their culture or cultures. If you aren't able to actually talk to them, for example, because they're a famous historical or fictional figure, do your best to find real evidence of where they've expressed their own opinions and pay close attention to their actions. Again, look for why they did things and how they went about doing them. To help tease this out, I'm now going to provide some examples, both of what it can look like when a person's stage is behind their surrounding culture, and of what it can look like when a person is ahead of their culture. These examples aren't the only ways that this can show up. I might say that a person in orange stage within a blue stage culture can respond to this mismatch in a certain way, but that doesn't mean that that's the only way that this combination can appear. I'm just going to give a few specific examples that I've actually noticed. First, let's consider some examples of what it might look like when a person's individual stage is behind the stage of the culture that's influencing them. A person in purple stage in a green stage culture might identify quite strongly with green stage values and truths, and especially if they grew up in a green stage culture, they might talk the talk like a native speaker because they are a native speaker. This is the language they grew up with. However, they don't actually fully understand the green stage view. You might be able to discover this by asking them why questions to explain these green stage values and truths. A person who is genuinely in green stage is more likely to answer why questions with fiery protests against orange. They can probably give specifics of things they've seen or thought about and personally felt incensed by, like a video they saw of how food animals are treated, or how they've noticed how wealthy people seem to be the most miserable. The answers of a person in purple stage, however, will likely tend to be more vague and story-based, sometimes with characters of almost mythologically simplistic flavor, like the big bad Trump. You can hear in their language that they absorbed these ideas secondhand from people around them, family and friends, their tribe, rather than internally arriving at these values for themselves. A person in blue stage, influenced by a green stage culture, might, for example, be politically correct because those are the rules, and that's how you should behave if you are a good person. Even though they might not fully understand the purpose behind those rules, they might follow them quite rigidly. However, because they don't really internally understand the green stage view, they might struggle with performing green stage, because for them it would be a performance, in more complex situations where the rules they've learned appear to conflict with each other. For example, how do you make a classroom environment welcoming to all students when some of those students are autistic and are distracted by movement, and some of them are ADHD and need to be free to move around? A person who is in blue stage might look to create top-down blue stage style rigid rules to manage the potential conflicts. A person who is genuinely in green stage, however, might answer that we should have all the people involved sit down and talk. Green stage, flat hierarchy, negotiation, and consensus, so we can find solutions that work for everybody. A person in orange stage, influenced by green stage culture, might do an excellent job of following green stage practices and mimicking green stage language. But take a look at why. They're probably going to mimic green stage best when that looks good and helps them be successful, or at least doesn't require them to sacrifice much money or status or their own personal achievement goals. One way you can suss out an orange stage person camouflaging themselves in green stage clothing is by looking at what they do when green and orange stage values significantly conflict. This reveals the why behind their actions. Are they willing to sacrifice significant money or status in order to do something that will really make a difference for the environment or for social justice? For a person who is genuinely in green stage, this isn't even a question. A person in green stage, influenced by a yellow stage culture, might pick up yellow stage ideas that sound good to green stage, like sustainability, without fully understanding them. I talk about this a little bit in my video titled Humanity's Yellow Stage Tipping Point. But you can tell the person's stage by how they go about implementing sustainability. A person in green stage talking about sustainability will probably focus on specific unconnected implementations, like organic farming or upcycling to reduce waste. But they won't have the yellow stage capacity to look at how multiple systems interact with each other. Someone who is genuinely in yellow stage, however, probably can't be satisfied looking at sustainability in just one area, or even looking at it separately in a few different areas. They will likely want to understand the big picture of how all these systems affect each other, and they'll want solutions that solve multiple problems at once. A really great example of this is permaculture. Permaculture is a genuinely yellow stage approach to sustainability. It actively manages multiple systems interacting together for sustainable self-sufficiency, like an intentional community living in energy-efficient homes that use gray water systems to water the food forests that they use to feed themselves. Now let's take a look at examples of people who have had stages ahead of their cultures. Descartes, in 17th century Europe, is an excellent example of a person in orange stage in a blue stage culture. He used sophisticated analysis, specifically skepticism and dialectic, to cut away everything else and begin from a radically logical starting point. I think, therefore I am. But following his reasoning after that point, you can see how his blue stage culture affected his basic assumptions. He assumed that if God exists, God must be separate from him, and God must be benevolent. As a result of his culture's blue stage lens, he was unable to see other possibilities. So, even though his orange stage capacity for logic and analysis was excellent, his conclusion ended up simply supporting his culture's existing blue stage beliefs that God exists. It could be easy to look at Descartes' blue stage cultural beliefs and miss that he was actually fully in orange stage. But if you look at how he was going about things, using meticulous analysis, it's obvious that he was in orange stage. Pico della Mirandola, in the Italian Renaissance, is an example of a person in yellow stage, with a blue/blue-orange stage culture. The Italian Renaissance was both very religious and the center of the emergence of humanism, an orange stage movement. The cultural environment was one of attempting to better understand God and to develop humans to be better manifestations of God's divine plan. Pico's efforts, on the surface, were no different. But look at how he went about this. He gathered and synthesized as many sources from as many cultures as he could to develop a unifying theory to answer all of the questions. Classic yellow stage. My final example is Epicurus. He provides an amazing example of someone who was a couple of millennia ahead of his time. Green stage within orange stage Hellenistic Athenian culture in the 4th to 3rd centuries BC. Hellenistic Athenian culture was strongly orange stage, rational, competitive, and oriented toward achievement, status, and wealth. At first blush, it might be difficult to notice that Epicurus himself was in green stage. He doesn't appear overly concerned with the environment or with social justice, both of which tend to be hallmarks of modern green stage. But remember to keep an eye on your own cultural lenses. Green stage in Hellenistic Greece would probably have looked quite different than it looks in today's globalized world. Also, Epicurus's whole philosophy is very rational, atheistic, and focused on the physical world. That all sounds orange stage, right? But the rational language he used was the language of his culture. And remember that stages are cumulative. A person in green stage still has access to rational thinking, so the use of logical analysis doesn't preclude the possibility of being in green stage. And being atheistic and focused on the physical world, growth stage in spiritual development, is not incompatible with green stage in consciousness development. You can easily be in growth stage and green stage at the same time. Let's look at the rest of the evidence. What's his why? He wants to find a way for people to be happy. Well, that could be orange stage or green stage, so that doesn't help. Okay, so what's his how? He adamantly rejected external success, achievement, status, and luxury as sources of happiness, focusing on the simple life, self-care, tranquility, and community instead. This all sounds like a classic description of how someone can shift into green stage in reaction against orange stage. Epicurus just got there about 2,000 years before the hippies did. Also, and here's the icing on the cake, he started a full-on green stage commune that lasted for over 6 centuries and inspired dozens of other Epicurean communes to spring up all over the Mediterranean world over that same time period. So, I hope this video helped to eliminate some of the challenges of assessing an individual's spiral dynamic stage, your own or someone else's, when it is different from the surrounding culture, but also provided some ideas for how you might attempt to do so.